Welcome to another edition of Quoth Raven, Louis Bright Raven. I'm your host, Louis Bright Raven, 30-year veteran writer, illustrator, and editor of comic, science fiction, fantasy, horror, and role-playing games. And it is Friday, May 13th. You'd think I'd be covering Friday the 13th series for TV Talk, wouldn't you? It didn't even occur to me until last second. I hadn't watched those things in ages, so there was no sense in doing that. And, well, I just had recently got the Marvel Studios Black Widow film from the library, so I figured why not do that instead. So let's talk about it. Black Widow 2021. Directed by Kate Shortland, screenplay by Eric Pearson, from a story by Jack Schaefer and Ned Benson, based on the Marvel Comics. Produced by Kevin Feige, Scarlett Johansson, Victoria Alonso, Louis D'Esposito, Nigel Gostelau, and Brad Winderbaum. Starring Scarlett Johansson, Florence Pugh, David Harbour, O.T. Fagbenle, Olga Kurylenko, William Hurt, Ray Winstone, and Rachel Wise. Production company was Marvel Studios, distributed by Walt Disney Studios Motion Pictures. Worldwide release was June 29th, 2021, but it was released July 9th, 2021 in the U.S. Has a running time of 2 hours and 14 minutes. This was released during the pandemic era, of course, so it's kind of a weird thing between, was it on theaters, and it was also in Disney Plus live stream, which led to some brouhaha between Johansson and Disney. But we'll get to that in a little bit. What it's about. In 1995, super soldier Alexei Shostakov and Black Widow Melina Vostokov work as Russian undercover agents posing as a family in Ohio with Natasha Romanoff and Yelena Boleva as their daughters. They steal some SHIELD intel and escape to Cuba, where their boss, General Dreykov, has Romanoff and Bolova taken away and sent to the Red Room for training. Think of it as kind of a weird thing. I mean, it made me think of the television show The Americans when I was first watching this, because they were supposed to be Russians pretending to be Americans in that film, in that TV series. But anyway, in the following decades, Shostakovich has been imprisoned in Russia, while Romanov and Bolova have become successful, dangerous assassins. Romanov eventually defects to SHIELD, ironically enough, after helping Clint Barton, a.k.a. Hawkeye, bomb Dreykov's Budapest office, which apparently kills Dreykov and his young daughter, Antonia. Cut to 2016. Romanoff is a fugitive for violating the Sokovia Accords when she helps Captain America escape in the film Civil War. She then escapes from U.S. Secretary of State Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross and flees to a safe house in Norway, supplied by Rick Mason, an ally from her earlier SHIELD days. Meanwhile, Bolova has killed a rogue former Black Widow, but she comes into contact with a synthetic gas that neutralizes the Red Room's chemical mind control agent. Bolova then sends the antidote vials to Romanov, hoping that she and the Avengers can free the other widows, and she goes into hiding. Mason has delivered these vials to Romanov, but Romanov hadn't opened the package, and she's unaware of it. She puts it in her Jeep, and she's going to town to get gas for her gas electric generator, when the Red Room agent Taskmaster attacks. Romanoff fights off Taskmaster and realizes that the vials came from Budapest, when she realizes that's what Taskmaster is after. So she goes to Budapest, to her old hideout, where she finds Bolova, who reveals that Dreykov is actually alive and that the Red Room is still active. Black Widows and Taskmaster attack them, but Romanov and Bolova evade them, and then they schedule a meet with Mason, who supplies them with a helicopter, a very old outdated helicopters, apparently. The sisters realize that they have to get their father, Shoskatov, out of prison so that he can tell them where the Red Room is. So they break him out of prison to learn Dreykov's location, and, well, he doesn't know where the Red Room is, so he directs them to Vostokov, who lives on a farm outside of St. Petersburg. There, Vostokov is refining the chemical mind control process that's used on the widows. Vostokov alerts Dreykov, for she is also mind controlled to a certain degree, and his agents arrive to take them down, but Romanov convinces Vostokov to help them, and the pair use face mask technology to switch places. They are taken down, because they're outnumbered, and they get taken to the Red Room, an aerial facility, basically think like a city version of a helicarrier. If you guys remember the Shield helicarriers from the Captain America movies. Voskatov frees Shoskatov. I wish they'd named some names that were so similar in pronunciation. And Belova from their restraints. Dreykov then sees through Romanov's disguise and reveals the taskmaster is Antonia, who suffered damage in the explosion severe enough that he had to put technology in her head to save her life. In turn, creating basically a humanoid cyborg-type soldier who is capable of mimicking the actions of anyone she sees. This is not really the original origin of the Taskmaster. It's the MCU version of the Taskmaster. Romanov is unable to attack Dreykov due to the pheromone lock that's installed in every widow, but she negates that by breaking her own nose and severing a nerve in her nasal passage, which I thought was kind of weird, but okay. Shoskatov, in his Red Guardian suit, battles Taskmaster while Voskatov takes out one of the facility's main engines, and then they lock, she and Red Guardian and Voskatov Widow lock Taskmaster in one of the holding cells. Dreykov escapes as other Black Widows attack Romanov, under mind control, of course. But Belova exposes them to the antidote. Romanov then copies the locations of the other widows worldwide from Dreykov's computer as the facility begins to explode and fall from the sky. She retrieves 2 surviving antidote vials and frees Taskmaster from a locked cell. Voskatov and Shoskatov escape via a plane while Belova takes out Dreykov's aircraft, which subsequently kills Dreykov for real this time. In freefall, Romanov gives Belova a parachute before battling the Taskmaster. After landing, Romanov uses one of the antidote vials on Taskmaster and then gives the other to Belova, along with the locations of the other mind-controlled widows so that they can find and free them. Obviously, Voskatov can duplicate the one vial once she has it in her lab, and then they can go out and rescue the rest of the widows. Belova, Voskatov, and Shoskatov and the rest of the widows say goodbye to Romanov and leave with Antonia and the freed widows as Thunderbolt Ross shows up to arrest Natasha for being in violation of the Accords. Two weeks later, of course, she's free, and then she meets with Mason again, who this time has surprised her and actually gives her an Avengers Quinjet to use in freeing the imprisoned Avengers from the raft, which is where, when we saw how did Captain America get to the raft to free the Avengers, it's because, and do what they did for Civil War, that's because she had the Quinjet that she got from Mason. In a post-credit scene set after Romanov's death, spoiler, she dies in Avengers Endgame, Yelena Belova is visiting Natasha's grave when Valentina Allegra Del Fonte, who's a rogue agent, blames Natasha's death on Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, and assigns him as Belova's next assassination target, which then leads us into the MCU Disney Plus Hawkeye TV series. Well, what do I think? Well, if I'm being honest, this is one of the weakest MCU movies. Now, to be fair, part of the reason for that is it's because it's a flashback tale. If they had been thinking this through properly, they would have made and released this right after Captain America Civil War in 2016, as it plays directly into the events leading to Cap freeing his fellow Avengers at the end of the movie. The fact that they didn't get this made until after Endgame and Natasha's death was already presented really cuts into the continuity and kind of hurts the film in that respect. That having been said, the overall story for what it is, as a standalone film, is respectable enough. The casting for Natasha's family was relatively strong, but I did not like this version of Taskmaster. Not because of who it was, that was a female version, but because the comics version of having the mutant power of photographic reflexes, where you just see it and can copy, is just cooler to me than someone being programmed to be able to mimic and predict from watching. The latter just seems too robotic and limited by comparison. And part of the fun of the Taskmaster in the comics is his running off at the mouth with his banter at his opponents. And of course, in this version, the character is completely silent until right at the very end, when after Dreykov is killed and she is given the antidote, she's like, is it over? Because obviously she's basically been suffering this whole time. Other than that, yeah, just wasn't really my favorite. I also wasn't all that impressed with the Dreykov character as a whole. He was a bit one-dimensional for me, perhaps. There were other plot holes in the film. Why would Vostokov have kept one of the Red Guardian suits at her farm, for example? After all, Shoskotov had been in prison ever since they escaped the U.S. some 20 years earlier. It doesn't seem like, I mean, I realize that she's kind of nostalgic for stuff because there's other things in that sequence of the film that suggest she missed the family and missed the other three, but it just seemed kind of an off thing, and it just seemed like it was just there for convenience to the plot than anything else. Why not do something smart as well and, like, I don't know, inject the synthetic gas antidote into the air recycling vent system of the city and cure all the widows that way? It just little things like that would have been a lot smarter and would have been more akin to what Black Widow as an intelligent agent would have done, I think. And they wouldn't have had to blow the city up either, or the facility up to do it. So I think it would have been a little bit, it's just there for action rather than common sense. Speaking of the Red Room floating city, don't have me no crap about how it keeps them from being detected, and this is why they were never found. Given all of the satellites around the world, I assure you that place would have popped up on somebody's radar. That was the absolute stupidest part of the film, in my opinion. I hated it. And given the rather short time it took Ross to show up after they blew the place up, did they know it was already there and were keeping tabs, or did Nat simply call them and say, hey, show up off camera? Probably the latter, which might explain why she wasn't in jail 2 weeks later and was absconding with a Quinjet, but they didn't exactly explain that either. So yeah, the story was kind of a dud, but it's an okay film. I just feel like there could have been so much more to it, and I think if it had been done earlier, and if it hadn't been doing things like an afterthought, it would have been a much better film. But I will say the cast did very well with what they were given. It is a rated PG-13 film. I give it 3.5 stars. Now, that being said, there are some other things that need to be taken into consideration. Hold on a second. as I said, Scarlett Johansson ended up suing Disney because they did the box office, plus they did the Disney Plus release at the same time because of COVID. Damn you, pandemic. The film did receive something like $379 million in the box office, and then a bunch of extra money came in through the Disney Plus subscribers and stuff, and she got a cut of that. Ultimately, they had to settle because, originally that was not part of the plan when they were going to release it. But $379 million is rather low when you think about the kind of money that the Marvel films were making. But again, that was in the pandemic. People weren't going to the theater. A lot of times the theaters just weren't even open to go see it in the theater at the time. I think that it would have been interesting to see, if we hadn't had the pandemic, how much money this would have made in the box office. It made 369 in a very limited system, so maybe it would have been a multi-million-dollar box or multi-billion-dollar box office. And again, for Marvel, who knows for sure? But I think it would have probably done lesser than some of the other films, because it was just so dependent on being tied into other films and other TV series, trying to connect all the dots between the from point A to point B to point C, between Civil War, this film, Endgame, and Hawkeye. And I think that's kind of the problem with more modern films with Marvel, most notably the most recent one, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where if you haven't watched WandaVision or you're not familiar with the history of the Scarlet Witch, rather, in the history of the comics, you might not understand why the events in that film take place the way they do. In fact, a lot of people who did watch WandaVision, a lot of people who do know the history, are not happy with how the film was made, and they don't like what they did with Wanda, even though that was the most logical choice that they could have done at the time. But with that in mind, this is what's going to possibly weaken films like future Marvel films, because the more films get intertwined with the Marvel universe, the more they're going to be related to one another. And as a result, that's going to be just a problematic situation, I think. And it's something that audiences are going to have to get used to, I think, unfortunately. That's what happens when you get into, fourth and fifth and sixth generation tier level of films now. Everything's going to be, you got to be into it. And I don't know if that's going to affect movie viewers or not, because it's kind of like the same effect as comics. Do you really want to get into the comics when you got to get into all these different titles to follow the events of everything going on? So it'll be interesting to see what the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe is in that regard. Okay, that's all for today. Next week, we will start reviewing manga, Anime Night, and we're going to discuss the classic 1970s anime Gatchaman, the Scientific Ninja Team. Is the complete collection. This is the Sentai Filmworks edition. There's 105 episodes. I've watched maybe 7 so far, so we're probably going to have a couple of weeks of doing this, because I don't think I'm going to get through them all. But so far, I'm enjoying it, and we'll talk about it more next week. In the meantime, I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow for sure yet. I know I've been gone away for a while, and in the interim of my time being away, we lost 2 supremely talented artists and gentlemen of comics, the late Neil Adams and the late George Perez. And both of those are mentors, particularly George is a mentor of mine, and I've been kind of depressed about it, and I'm trying to figure out what to say. Hopefully I will be able to do some video tributes to them in the near future, and get back on schedule for our regular programming here on the channel. But until then, I appreciate you guys watching. If you enjoyed this video, or you think others might, please hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to continue to get content from my channel. As always, I thank you for watching and for your support. On social media, you can find me on Facebook at Lewis.BrightRaven, on Twitter at LewisBrightRave2. You can see more of my artwork at deviantart.com/BrightRaven. You've been watching Quoth the Raven, Lewis Bright Raven exclusively on YouTube. You can email me at quotheravenlbr72@gmail.com. And if I don't get back to you within, say, 24 to 48 hours, try lewisbrightraven@yahoo.com. That's all for now. We'll see you next time. Have a great weekend.